With the launch of Season 7, we saw two major reworks come into the game for Sombra and Roadhog, and one of these is not like the other, I fear. In my most recent video, I discussed Sombra, and it stirred up some conversations. Now, whether or not you think Sombra's rework is good or not is up for debate, but I think what is undisputed is the fact that her rework was successful at changing her playstyle pretty fundamentally. She went from a hero with very little mid-fight presence, who was essentially a hack bot that came in, did a little damage, annoyed the enemy team, then kind of TP'd across the map to the nearest health pack, and now she's a hero that plays more like Genji or Tracer with a lot of in-combat mobility and more damage options in the mid-fight at least. This was a pretty drastic shift in her playstyle, as now she has a lot more uptime and can kind of contribute and play with the team a lot more than she ever could. Hog, on the other hand, went from being a tank that was very much reliant on his hook combo and also just kind of being a one-man army who doesn't really die, and now after his rework, he's a hero that revolves around his hook combo and being thick, and can kind of see where the issue falls when it comes to calling this a rework. But he does have a trap now. So what exactly makes a good rework? This is very subjective, but I think in general the whole point of a rework is to change a problematic hero to something less problematic and more fun. It is typically a change in playstyle of some kind, whether it be adding abilities or the removal of an ability or just changing the way abilities work completely. I think back to like Mercy getting Valkyrie as a brand new ultimate, or Tord being able to come now. Those were definitely reworks. Now, since Sombra's rework came out in the same season as the Hog rework, I think it's kind of fair to compare these two a bit. They both have very frustrating mechanics to play against, especially like pre-reworks. They were attempting to rework their playstyles to be less reliant on the things that make them so oppressive. Now, although Sombra still does have her permastealth, this is something that has been confirmed as of, I think, literally today as I'm recording this, that they are planning to change the duration on that. So I don't know what that's going to look like. There's been no details yet, but I guess we'll find out as time goes on. But her get out of jail free card has pretty much been revoked. They completely reworked how translocator worked, and they added a new ability, and ultimately this led to her having a different playstyle than she previously had. This to me is a successful rework because they accomplished what they set out to do and reworked the way she plays. Now, Hog, on the other hand, he had numerous changes that really kind of failed to change his playstyle. They reworked his primary fire and pretty much removed his alternate fire mechanic, and they kind of mashed it into one. I get what they were going for. They tried to make his damage a bit more reliable without having to rely on that one shot or hook combo. They also changed how his vape works. Now they put it on a resource meter similar to how D.Va's defense matrix is. This seemed to be an attempt to give him a more consistent way to tank and reduce damage in more scenarios. So the big thing with this rework was the addition of a brand new ability, Pigpen, which is essentially a trap that when triggered it does damage and slows enemies in an area of effect. This was meant to add some utility and team play to his kit, but what it really did was just add an extra step to his hook combo. Instead of hook, shoot, and melee, now you kind of place a trap down and then hook, shoot, and melee and you kind of play around your trap in that way. In theory, the trap does add utility. He can use it to zone out enemies and place it in a sneaky spot to try and deter flankers. So in theory, yes, they added utility to his kit. They gave him a bit more agency in how he wants to play, being able to pump out damage a bit more consistently and having more options when he's using his vape. But ultimately, his playstyle and gameplay loop plays almost the same as pre-worked Hog. You're still very much reliant on getting those hook combos. You fill that same niche of just trying to get those picks. They also took away a lot of his counterplay. His vape can't be canceled anymore. Neither can his whole Hog, but I think that was a change that was already made a little bit earlier. But this ultimately led to him having a very similar playstyle to he previously did, just added more survivability and a little more utility. Now, I call this rework a failure because it didn't really make any fundamental changes to the hero and didn't really address the problems with his kit. He still fills the same role. The hook combo is his thing still. I don't know if that was necessarily their intention to change it or uproot that gameplay, but if it wasn't, then I don't know if you could necessarily call it a rework. I kind of feel like Junker Queen is kind of like the Overwatch 2 version of Hog. Like, if they didn't introduce her, I feel like a rework would have kind of looked like her kit, if that makes sense. She's got similar mechanics, just I feel like everything about her is a bit more dynamic. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be a Hog expert. In fact, I don't really like Hog very much at all. I find him very annoying. I know that's a lot coming from a Sombra main, but I feel like this rework is a bit more equivalent to Sombra's first rework at the launch of Overwatch before they gave her her second one in Season 7. That rework ultimately failed to change her gameplay in a meaningful way, and it didn't really address a lot of the problems that people had with her in the first place. So I wouldn't be too surprised if he gets the Sombra treatment at some point and gets a more fundamental rework later on. Maybe something that pushes him to either be more brawly or less reliant on the hook, or giving him actual team utility that doesn't revolve around the hook. Now, things kind of change if we do end up going back to 6v6. At that point, I feel like the off-tank role ends up being relevant again, and he might be viable as is in that role. But right now, as a main tank, he's like, as the only tank in the game on your team, he just feels a bit flawed in a lot of ways, and I feel like this rework didn't quite address that. Now, if you guys have any ideas for what a Hog rework would, if you're a Hog connoisseur and you have ideas, you know, you should leave them in the comments. I'd be interested to see. I don't have any great suggestions. I feel like this video's purpose is more to examine what went wrong with this rework and more or less define what makes a successful one. But yeah, tell me your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Hog's rework was successful? You know, I don't, but that's okay. All right, subscribe for clear skin, and yeah, I gotta go.